InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts.
Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts. In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at a few public company announcements from Halo Collective Incorporated, trading on the NEO as Halo and the OTC as HCANF, Aurora Cannabis Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as ACB, DELC Corporation, trading on the CSE as DELC and the OTCQB as DELCF, as well as Village Farms International Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as VFF. I apologize that we've been off for the past week or so. This has been because I've had my firstborn child, so I've been away and obviously focused on baby stuff. But now we're back and right away focusing on Aurora Cannabis today, who announced its financial and operational results for the fourth quarter and full year fiscal 2021, ended June 30th of 2021. We're very pleased with our strategic and financial progress in growing our high-margin medical revenue, rationalizing expenses, strengthening our balance sheet, and reducing our cash burn during fiscal year 2021. Now, given ongoing challenges in the Canadian adult recreational market, our broad diversification across domestic medical, international medical, and adult recreational segments provides us with underlying strength, stability, and growth opportunities in an evolving industry for global cannabinoids. Additionally, our enviable leadership position as the number one Canadian LP in global medical cannabis by revenue on a trailing 12-month basis, supported by regulatory and compliance expertise, is a tailwind we expect to enable us to ultimately expand into global adult recreational as medical regimes evolve, stated Miguel Martin, Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Cannabis. Now, he continued, we have positioned ourselves for long-term success by delivering further improvement in our industry-leading adjusted gross margin and substantially narrowing our adjusted EBITDA loss compared to the year-ago period, with annual cost savings of approximately $60 to $80 million across selling, general, and administrative production costs, facility, and logistic expenses. And we have a clear pathway to achieve adjusted EBITDA profitability. Importantly, our considerable cash balance of $440.9 million, substantial improvement in working capital, and strong balance sheet support our organic growth and can be utilized for more opportunistic M&A, particularly in the U.S. So Aurora, like many Canadian LPs or Canadian companies, eyeing up the U.S. market. And again, still a lot of speculation on the U.S. market around when and if there's going to be some sort of regulatory changes on a federal level. Like I said, the STATES Act, the MORE Act, the SAFE Act have been proposed many a time, still have not been pushed forward. There's a lot of speculation as to why on this. Obviously, there's a lot of other attention on world geopolitical politics right now going on with Afghanistan. A lot of controversy within the Biden administration so far, and not a lot of collective working together. Again, the Schumer bill not received as strongly as I think many people in the industry were hoping for. So there is still expectation on when one of those acts might be passed, or if there is a path toward federal legalization over the next couple of years, though it does seem to be a slow path if it's going to be at all. So I think a lot of companies are still very interested because there's a lot of investment money and a lot of you're starting to see sort of a rekindling of the fire in the U.S. cannabinoid industry. That is, again, very attractive to Canadian companies. But overall, I don't know when that's actually going to materialize into real change. And it seems that a lot of companies are still just doing a lot of prep work in anticipation of when that market will open up for them. So you can read more of the actual financial details in the links attached in the article. But essentially for Aurora Cannabis, they had improvements in their medical, domestically and international, more so domestically, and really were hit hard when it came to their domestic recreational sales. So when you're looking at Aurora Cannabis, they're really not doing that well within the recreational market. And of course, every company can blame COVID conditions and many of the difficulties that are facing the Canadian market at the moment. But you are also seeing many other companies within the same space, within the recreational market, are actually having increased sales, increased profitability, and are moving in very much a good direction. So this shows that obviously, again, for some of these larger LPs, specifically Aurora Cannabis right now, a lot of their brands and a lot of their products that are sitting in the recreational market are not being as well received. The reason that they're doing better in the medical market in Canada is because the medical market is a lot less competitive within Canada. And that could be, the truth could be said about that. kind of almost on a global scale somewhat right now, in that as soon as there are the options for recreational and medical within the same area, you see that most companies move towards recreational for just easy off-selling of their products, versus medical, obviously, as well. There's a lot stricter regulations and more scrutiny within the medical market for obvious reasons. So I think for a lot of companies, recreational always ends up just taking the bigger share of what their focus is. And for Aurora Cannabis, this has been somewhat beneficial to them in that they are one of the few large players still in the medical space within Canada. So I think that that's obviously where they're going to continue to see the best profits right now, as again, when they're looking at the recreational market, their brands and their products are really not doing well against really any competitors. And a lot of this is resulting in a lack of profitability. So they could end up just focusing entirely on medical over the next couple of years. And they do seem to be heavily focused more on international medical markets, again, anticipating movement into the U.S., and they're very well set up in the EU marketplaces. But again, I don't know if that's enough to sort of affect the loss of sales going into the recreational market. So you could see them slowly restructure over the next couple of years. And obviously, again, a lot of these Canadian large LPs not doing so well when compared to some of the smaller, more niche branded producers in Canada. Looking next at DELC Holdings Corporation, who announced that two-time NBA champion Lamar Odom will headline Meet DELC on November 7th. Odom's professional basketball career spanned 15 years, including 7 as a forward with the Los Angeles Lakers, earning him NBA championships in 2009 and 2010. And he joined LeBron James, Allen Iverson, Tim Duncan, and Dwayne Wade as members of the gold-winning U.S. men's basketball team at the 2004 Athens Olympics. Now, in 2015, Odom was hospitalized in Las Vegas after a near-death overdose that resulted in multiple seizures, strokes, and a coma. And the upcoming documentary, Lamar Odom Reborn, chronicles his life from past traumas and struggles with anxiety and substance abuse to his recovery and healing through psychedelic treatments, meditation, and breathwork. And Odom's keynote fireside chat, Lamar Odom and Zappy Zappalin Reborn, will reunite him with the documentary's director for an intimate discussion of his healing journey with psychedelic medicine and a preview of the film. We're so honored that Lamar will be sharing his personal story of healing with all of us at Meet DELC, said Jackie Stang, co-founder of DELC. He's shown tremendous courage facing his past traumas and addiction, and his openness to exploring psychedelic treatments is inspiring. And we hope that his story will open the hearts and minds of more people so we can truly address the growing mental health crisis we are facing. Now, Meet DELC is committed to bringing awareness of the science-backed benefits of psychedelics and business opportunities to the mainstream and larger global community by reframing the psychedelic conversation. Now, the experiential event will feature dancers, music, 3D mapping, visual arts, new technologies, and research, thought-provoking presentations, and one of the world's largest psychedelic business expos. And the full lineup of keynote speakers and panelists can be found below. There's quite the list, and there will be an array of topics such as why are psychedelics medicine, how big money is already playing psychedelics, PTSD reset and recovery, psychedelics in addition, an intimate discussion on recovery in a modern world, etc., and it goes on. And Meet DELC is a subsidiary of DELC, which is focused on bringing psychedelic wellness to the mainstream, and the company does this through an umbrella of related owned and operated businesses, such as trusted media and e-commerce platforms, in-person events like Meet DELC, as well as a licensed lab to develop IP, R&D, and innovate high-quality and safe product lines, as well as the largest and most successful network of physical clinics to administer effective treatments. So, if you've been paying attention to Meet DELC, again, it's going to be coming this November 7th. It does seem to be a pretty fantastic event, at least focused on psychedelics. A lot of interesting panel speakers, a lot of different businesses will be involved within the psychedelic space. They will be showing some of the information from DELC clinics, which is also quite interesting. And this goes to show as well that now you're starting to see some similar plays that we saw in the cannabis industry in the past, which is bringing in celebrity spokespeople for these events. The same has already been said for some of the other companies within the psychedelic space today, but I do think that this is heading in the right direction, and this does show that usually these things will follow kind of a general trend. Once you start bringing in a lot of well-respected sports athletes, it does follow that you get sort of bigger and more recognizable celebrity endorsements following shortly afterwards. A lot of sports athletes end up supporting cannabinoid medicine, or in this case, psychedelic medicine, just due to the amount of injuries and stress that their job pertains. So I do think that you're probably going to see a few more athletes start jumping into the psychedelic space as some sort of spokesperson, or in this capacity as a headliner and a speaker or a guest panelist. And then you might start to see, again, bigger endorsement. Obviously, again, in the past, when it comes to psychedelics, there already has been some pretty large-scale endorsement. Again, the Netflix series or Netflix show that they had about taking a trip, I've had a lot of different celebrity endorsers in it, all discussing their psychedelic experiences. So I do think that you're going to kind of see this pick up more and more, and hopefully there will be more events such as Meet DELC once this has been proven to be successful and shows kind of the general interest. I think right now you're seeing probably more interest in psychedelics than you are in cannabinoids to some extent, at least from a consumer perspective. I think that right now a lot of, at least in most areas where recreational cannabis is available, the sort of honeymoon phase has somewhat waned. Now people are a little bit more particular about the product offerings that are available, about prices, about quality levels. Not that they're not enjoying or buying the cannabis, but I think that now it's no longer lost its sort of novelty appearance to many people, whereas psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, is kind of on a lot of people's brains right now. Pardon the pun. And it is going to be probably the next big thing that I think will gain a lot of momentum. You've seen a lot of different areas start decriminalizing psilocybin, and it does seem to be one of the most asked after substances right now, which I'll actually continue on later in the podcast. Next, looking at Village Farms International, who announced that it's entered into an option agreement whereby the company has received the irrevocable right to acquire an 80% ownership interest in Netherlands-based Lili Holland BV upon payment of €50,000. Lili is one of the 10 applicants selected by lottery to receive a license subject to customary government approval to legally cultivate and distribute cannabis to retailers known as coffee shops when the Dutch government implements its experiment to investigate closed cannabis supply chains. The Dutch Supply Chain Experiment, also known as the Dutch acronym WECG, and the Dutch Supply Chain Experiment, which is scheduled to operate for a minimum of 4 years with the potential for national expansions, is expected to be the first legal recreational cannabis market in Europe. Now, the option agreement provides for Village Farms to acquire 80% of Lili shares for a total of €3.9 million, of which €950,000 is due and payable to Lili shareholders upon the exercise of the option. The remainder is due in 3 installments, subject to certain project development milestones. Now, Lili and Village Farms plan to construct 2 indoor controlled environment agriculture production facilities, leveraging Lili's track record managing complex regulatory and approval procedures in the Netherlands at both the federal and local levels, as well as specific cultivation experience and Village Farms' 3+ decades as a vertically integrated CEE grower, as well as its extensive experience in cultivation, product development, and commercialization. Now, as the majority owner of Lili, Village Farms will be responsible for the development of the project and product commercialization through the fully vertically integrated business model, including design and construction of the facilities, operation of the facilities, product development and strategy, branding and marketing, leveraging experience gained in each of these areas through the success of its wholly owned subsidiary, Pure Sun Farms. Now, the total supply requirement for the 10 approved producers participating in the Dutch supply chain experiment is specified by the Netherlands government to be approximately a minimum of 65,000 kilograms of dried flower annually, and should the Dutch supply chain experiment be expanded nationally from the initial approximately 80 coffee shops to nearly 600 coffee shops following formal evaluation by the Dutch government during the 3rd year of the program, it's estimated that the Netherlands would require a minimum of 485,000 kilograms of dried flower annually. Now, we view the Dutch supply chain experiment as a critical step forward to the broad legalization of recreational cannabis in Europe, and our majority ownership of Lili is both an opportunity to participate in the first recreational market in Europe and a springboard to becoming as a major participant in a broader recreational market in Europe, said Michael DeGiglio, CEO of Village Farms. Now, the founders at Lili share our passion for the cannabis plant, our belief in the role of cannabis in health and wellness, our commitment to sustainable growing practices, and the advantage of truly vertically integrated operations. Village Farms has a long proven track record as a vertically integrated CEA grower, design and construction of leading-edge facilities, efficient large-scale operations, product development strategy, branding, and marketing that, combined with Lili's local expertise, positioned us for the success in this market. So, big step forward for Village Farms, basically creating a Pure Sun Farms-like business model now in the Netherlands. And again, if you've been paying attention to this Dutch supply chain experiment, this is something to pay attention to if you're looking at the EU marketplace and sort of where things are going to be heading over the next couple of years within Europe. Again, this is sort of the canary in the coal mine for recreational cannabis onloading in the European markets. Again, there's a lot of medical markets that are continuing to open up and expand. You're starting to see local production start to spill out in a lot of these EU marketplaces. It's still limited at the moment, but it is starting to become a bigger factor when it comes to the import-export of cannabis into these markets. And I do think that this will probably be well received. Again, the Netherlands already has a sort of good cannabis social background when it comes to people's expectations of cannabis being available from a tourist perspective. I think it'll also be well received locally, and hopefully that will start the expansion of recreational cannabis into some of the other EU marketplaces. As well, if you're kind of paying attention to, like I said, what Village Farms gets out of this, I do think that if you've been paying attention to Pure Sun Farms and the success that company has had, which I think has been quite substantial within BC, as well as in other provinces, they really focused on the right product formats, the right product pricing, and the right product quality right out of the gate, and have beat out a lot of their competitors within the markets that they're in. I think the same will probably apply here to Village Farms and Leli Holland. If it's done correctly, this could be another huge benefit for Village Farms, as well as, again, giving them an easy access point to other recreational markets in Europe once they become available. So I do think that this strategy might be a little bit more successful than, again, some of the larger LP strategies, which are just focusing on medical import and export into certain markets, mainly Germany and the UK at the moment. And as much as there is a lot of opportunity within those markets at the moment, I do think that it's going to be quite some time before either of those countries go recreational. And also, I do think that there will still be a lot of due diligence that needs to be followed up on to get into the recreational market in those countries once that is allowed. It'll probably be a limited license market for most European countries once they go into recreational, similar to this Dutch supply experiment going on right now. Again, starting with a very small amount of sort of coffee shops / dispensaries that they're going to be selling out of, and then only expanding at the 3-year mark. So a company like Village Farms, if they can do this well, is probably going to have an easier time getting into other limited license markets within the EU, as they've already had a very tried and true track record. So I do think that this is a really smart strategy for them and something to pay attention to over the next couple of years, as I do think that you will see similar experimental recreational markets in a very limited capacity start popping up in other markets as well in the EU. And I do think that if this is done well, this will be kind of the model that many people look at as to how to onboard recreational in a smaller capacity, as again we've seen even in the US. When you're looking at a state-by-state comparison, many of the early adopters of cannabis in the U.S. were a lot less limited license capacity. They really let a lot of people into the space as aggressively as possible. Now they've had some difficulties with that as things have progressed further, whereas you're seeing newer states that are onboarding recreational or medical cannabis, either or, are doing it in a very limited capacity, a very controlled capacity, and a very small scale capacity, where they're able to see what the effects are going to be on each localized economy before just sort of letting the floodgates open. So very much sort of following suit of what has happened in other parts of the world. And again, I do think that this will be something to pay attention to, as it could be the sort of unlocking of recreational markets in the EU. Lastly today, looking at Red Light Oregon Incorporated, which is a 50-50 joint venture of Halo Collective, as well as Red Light Holland Corporation, trading on the CSE as TRIP and the OTC as TRUF, who announced preliminary findings from a statistically significant and representative market study of Oregon adults. Now, the market research study aimed to gather insights on the likely beneficiaries of Measure 109 and the legalization of psilocybin services by the Oregon Health Authority for adults in Oregon, and help support for the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board and health officials in making data-informed regulations. Now, the market research utilized an online survey with 13 questions answered by 473 Oregonians. There's some data insights there. So 86% of adults in psilocybin services are interested in microdosing. 49% of those interested in psilocybin services are interested in outcomes such as increasing creativity, exploring their mind, and exploring spirituality. and Oregonians who are not interested in psilocybin services because they do not want to pay for them list their largest concern is supporting big pharma. Now, 84% of those interested in psilocybin services are interested in outcomes to help their mental health. And there's a bunch of other statistics and pieces of data that you can look in the link attached in the article or in the article itself. Now, the data that Red Light Oregon has received so far from Oregon is showing that the immediate need people have for psychedelic services to help their mental health. Now, the data also shows many of them are interested in microdosing, said Todd Shapiro, CEO and director of Red Light Holland. Measure 109 is focused on equity, and equity starts with education, which is why we have launched our Common Outreach program. Now, Oregonians have also shown us their genuine concern around supporting Big Pharma, and Red Light Oregon is committed to being the people's company, starting by listening to what the people want while advocating for legal access through education, information, and responsible use. Now, with 51% of adults interested in psilocybin services and 88% of those respondents being interested in microdosing, we believe there's a huge opportunity for a company with our shared expertise to provide the people of Oregon with the best services, added Katie Field, co-president of Red Light Oregon and president and executive director at Halo Collective. Now, further data from the survey continues to be analyzed, and an official report is estimated to be released to the public, the OPAB, and health officials in mid-October. Again, you're seeing, I would say this isn't like the biggest data survey ever, 473 people out of Oregon, still a pretty small insight. I think you have a lot more data already available through Johns Hopkins, through MAPS. I do get a little annoyed that often this is the case, whether you're looking at cannabis or psychedelics, that very few people actually share or cite other people's hard-earned information or data. It seems still that everyone wants to have their own covetous little data set that they can put out into the world, when really there's already been a couple thousand different market studies and direct studies with patients who are actually receiving psychedelic treatments. That's through many different companies and sort of foundations that are out there. And you could have a lot bigger of a data set that you could support here, or say that this data set supports what has already been reported in the past. I find that just relying on their 473 patients insight alone is pretty worthless. Not completely worthless, but again, when there's all of this different information that's already available out there, it would make more sense in, the context of this article or the context of their news release to have paid attention to some of those results and cited them as well, saying that, oh, here are the comparisons, here's what we noted, here's how this differentiates from, for instance, a MAP study that maybe used 2,000 to 10,000 people, which they do have, or a Johns Hopkins study that's worked with hundreds to thousands of patients, or some of the different psychedelic retreats in Jamaica that have, again, worked with hundreds, if not thousands of patients. I think that all of those together would give you a very similar story, but unfortunately that comparison isn't here. Some of the interesting things, and again, if you've been paying attention to MAPS, who I always recommend paying attention to when you're wanting to know more about the psychedelic landscape, what's going on with legalization, what's going on with large-scale studies, they're a great sort of collective to go to. They've already reported in the past that they have done a large-scale study with microdosing, which was a placebo double-blind study, and they showed that, unfortunately, when it comes to microdosing, a lot of it is just the consumer's expectations. So most of the time, people who are going into microdosing have had some sort of psychedelic experience in the past. Doesn't always say whether that was negative or positive. Most of the people who are going into microdosing usually did not have a positive psychedelic experience in the past. So that could have been something in high school or when they were younger with a bunch of friends, a weird setting, a weird sort of environment, and they had maybe a sketchy time. But maybe there was moments of it where they glimpsed some benefits, or maybe they've just done the research now and are thinking, maybe I should give this another try. Those tend to be the people who are looking at the microdosing. When you're looking at people who have, or a lot of people who, the main reason that they're interested in microdosing as well is the fear and paranoia of getting an actual full dose trip. This is something I really hope that this industry works to remove, similar to how cannabis has had to work very hard to remove many of the stigmas surrounding past cannabis experiences and what people view of cannabis today. Again, it being deemed an essential business did a big step forward for a lot of people's perception of cannabis and how THC isn't scary. At the end of the day, yes, it can affect your mind, but it's just your mind. You don't get cuts on your arm. You don't get hives. You don't get some sort of death disease from having a weird mental experience. And a lot of the times, many studies support, and this is coming from Johns Hopkins. This is coming from a lot of the people who are doing extremely detailed scientific research when it comes to the analysis of the brain under psychedelics, the analysis specifically under larger doses. You can look at the DMT, the spirit molecule, the book that was written about that, where he did have larger doses of DMT at certain points in the study. And many people have debated on this about the idea that the psychoactive part, for instance, THC in cannabis, or the psilocybin, or DMT, or LSD, or any of these compounds, that the psychedelic component, the part that actually activates that psychoactive part of your mind and takes you on this trip, is actually extremely essential to the healing outcome that comes out of these products. That it isn't just strictly that these chemicals hit your brain and PTSD and anxiety melt away, because that's just not how our brains do actually work. That there is something that science still can't measure quite as accurately as I think we would all like, but there's something very necessary and very essential about having these compounds actually give you that altered state experience, and that is where the vast majority of the mental healing comes from. And that with a lot of these people, there's no downside to them taking microdosing. There's nothing against that. But if they are really looking to make long impact development on their mental state, whether that's anxiety, PTSD, trauma, etc., if they do not take these a little bit of larger doses, at least into the 1 and 3 gram doses for psilocybin, or at least to the point where you are getting some sort of psychoactive stimulus, there is a lot of research that's coming out, that continues to come out, that supports that these people will not get as big of a benefit as the person who actually decides to do a psychedelic retreat. And this can be done in a variety of fashions. You could do this, in more the traditional setting, if you're going to Jamaica or some sort of more island-like community or native-esque community, and going out into the woods, having a much more spiritual experience with some sort of psychedelic navigator who is going to be giving you insights. It's a much more naturalistic approach. Those have gotten great results. You can also do it the much more clinical way, where you have doctors and nurses available to monitor everything about you. You have a very safe environment. They're offering some sort of either closed eye or visual stimuli to keep you calm. And then they're also doing soft, soothing music. It's in like a low light environment. Those have also shown a lot of great results. But a big part of that is also showing that if it's people unwilling to take these somewhat larger doses, not a heroic dose of 8 grams or 10 grams, but at least just enough to activate the psychoactive parts of your brain, a lot of these people will lose out on the full efficacy of these drugs, and that is where Big Pharma will never really be quite able to compete within the psychedelic space. And that's a reason why, as much as they're trying to jump into this area and do things, they just won't be able to, because of how their business model is set up on not having these higher dosage formats and not having a more naturalistic approach. So I do think that hopefully this type of information will become more and more obvious to both consumers and businesses alike that are in this space, where they realize that, okay, you need to get a bit of the high in order for you to get the healing. That this is what works on your brain, is it's not just these chemicals slightly impacting, on a molecular level, something that's going to eventually dissipate your anxiety, but you actually need to come full terms with accepting some sort of high experience, and then actually coming back from it and doing a moral, inventory or spiritual inventory, and actually coming to a conclusion on, did this help you? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are just piss scared of getting high. I don't know why. Being high is a really fun time. From my personal experience, it's been really great. Even some of the scariest, worst trips of my life have been the most eye-opening and the most healing and the most beneficial to me. And many people report the same, that even the scary times have a point, have a necessity, have actually something to teach you. And hopefully that will become more normalized. I have heard some companies who are focusing on trying to make non-psychoactive psychedelics, which I think is such a preposterous idea, and I think will, again, unfortunately, just be a massive amount of snake oil that gets sold into the public and muddies the water when it comes to efficacy on these products. Similarly to what we've seen with THC and CBD isolate within the cannabis industry, is people have taken these high doses of straight THC and that it doesn't give them what they want. And the reality is because it requires other cannabinoids acting with it. Same thing with CBD isolate that's being biosynthesized in a lab. Why doesn't it work as well as the CBD that's actually derived from a hemp plant and has, even just at a 0.1 or a 0.01% THC in it, the smallest amount, but just enough to kickstart things in your body to actually get the healing benefits? And I think that that's hopefully something, like I said, that debate will continue on within the psychedelic and cannabis landscape, and hopefully it will come to the right conclusion and people will become less scared. And that's, I think, the biggest hurdle that all these industries are facing, is to remove people's mental barrier of fucking crazy fear over getting high. All of these people who say, oh, I don't want to be out of control. Yet most of these same people take massive amounts of pharmaceutical-based medicine where they have no control. They're being prescribed by a doctor who gives them little information on the actual products that they're getting, which companies they come from, any of the negative results that have been involved in that. They give you basically just a simple form sheet. Much less research is done when it comes to pharmaceuticals for the average consumer than it comes to them taking a single dose of psilocybin, which I find preposterous, and again, hopefully something that will change over time. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.